Okay. So pressing start now. All right, kia ora everyone. Just wait for a couple of minutes or so as people start joining. All right. Okay, we're going to get underway shortly. All right, fantastic. Seems as though there's a decent number of people in the room now, so we'll get underway and other people will join as we go. So yeah, kia ora everyone. I'm Nick, I'm an investment manager at WNT Ventures. Welcome and thank you for joining us this morning for this WNT Ventures expert session. It's becoming harder to supply healthy food options like fresh produce to people globally while maintaining a competitive price point against processed alternatives. Robotics can help the sustainable future of fresh produce. Today, we're fortunate enough to hear from Steve Saunders. He's the founder and CEO of Robotics Plus. He's going to share insights into building a world-leading robotics and automation company from New Zealand, how to unlock new levels of productivity in some of the world's most labor-intensive food and fiber value chains. This discussion is going to run for around 30 to 40 minutes, and it will be followed with an audience Q&A. So please write your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll come to those at the end. So Steve, thank you for being with us. I'd like to start a little bit on your background, if you don't mind. Robotics Plus is a current focus, of course, but there have been many hats that you've worn over the past 30 years or so as your career has progressed. So if you don't mind starting off with telling us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how did you start, and what are the other current activities that you're interested in?
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and morena, everybody. Yeah, look, I've had a sort of interesting career. I guess I left school just after I was 17, and sort of started a career in horticulture that lasted all of about a year, and then I went off to Australia, and I actually did my first startup when I was about just after 18, which was started a franchise up drilling bores in Gold Coast homes, of all things, but that was, again, identifying a need that people were building a lot of canal houses in Australia. There was water restrictions, and a bit of knowledge from Tauranga, where I'm based. Knew that there was always fresh water not far near the ocean, 14 feet under the ground. So we had the concept, and we started a small pilot, and soon had about nine teams drilling bores all over the Gold Coast, and until, of course, the council came and shut us down because there's no rules about it, but they were a bit worried we were tapping into something they didn't know. But that was a lot of fun and gave me my first experience of what it was to sort of be a bit of an entrepreneur and have a crack at things. I came back from Australia and I sort of rekindled with my horticultural career and worked for a company, Te Puna Packing Cell in Tauranga for a bit, and started off at a very low level in the organisation. Within 2 years, I was second at top, and got a lot of experience working with the New Zealand Crown and Research Institutes about integrating new technologies into sort of orchards, and that really gave me great insight into the power of what new things could do and what new technologies could do. And actually, I was at the coalface of how to integrate that into the orchard systems. And I think that stuck with me for a really, really long time. But I was actually, just go back a bit earlier, I was born in Morrinsville and grew up on a dairy farm and moved to Tauranga when I was about 14 or 15. And I've pretty much been based here ever since. So just jumping back into the story, so I worked for the company probably for about 8 years, and got a lot of learnings out of that. And then sort of probably in the late 90s, it was time to go out, and I got back out and started a first ag business, which is really a consultancy management company. And I worked with another founder who I'd worked with at the company I actually worked for. And We had that company for about 6 years, and it was a really interesting time about starting a whole new company from scratch, working with other founders. But there's a lot of good learnings, and one of the great learnings I had from that process was my co-founder, who was a lot older from me, and what he was great about was always thinking about where we were going to be in 5 years' time. He was always forward thinking, and I learned a lot from that process about, today's already happened and you can't change it, but it's really about looking forward to in terms of what does the future hold and what are the opportunities. And I think that really set me off on my path. And after 6 years of partnership, we sold that business up, and then I started another orchard management company and built the largest Kiwifruit orchard management company. And it was at a transition time where orchards traditionally had managers on, but that was becoming uneconomical or unsustainable, and we moved into this process about professional orchard management. And through that, we set up a number of systems from everything to do with the orchard, from the consultancy, the management, the labour management, to actually setting up contracting machinery services, and grew that into a significant business. And then from that business, we started to derive other businesses. So we built the world's largest pollen company. So that was extracting pollen from flowers and reapplying it to set better crops. Then founded Mount Pack and Cool, which is now one of the largest privately owned kiwifruit packhouse operations in New Zealand, was packing over 24 million trays of kiwifruit on the spanning a single site of over 6 hectares of cool stores and packhouse production. Then I also started a research lab because we wanted to know more about carbon footprints, the environment in terms of orchards. So we actually set up our own science lab, and had a really good insights into sort of the dynamics of soil. And that all worked really well when PSA came into the New Zealand Kiwifruit in 2010, because that science lab quickly got switched to supporting the industry and doing research around the PSA. The pollen company was hugely affected. This was a business that we could generate $6 to $8 million in 8 weeks, was suddenly just cut off at the knees when PSA got announced, because it was uncertain whether that pollen carried the disease. So we had to, it was probably a real phase for me where diversity played a big role, that I wasn't just one business and I had multiple businesses to survive that impact. It also taught a lot about leadership and a lot about pivoting and how to make really fast decisions and really intense moments. But also on that journey, I was really interested. I was starting to see the impact of labour in our orchard management systems, and I was really interested in terms of how tech automation would play a role into the future. And I started investigating around the New Zealand industries, and that's where I found my co-founder, now Dr. Alistair Scarf, who had just finished his degree with first class honours in engineering, and I helped support him through his PhD. And that really was a process from 2008 through to around 2013. But the premise was it was actually a really good way to look at the tech. And the view was, Alistair, if you can prove to me that we can get a robot that could pick kiwifruit, or you can demonstrate we could robotically pick kiwifruit, let's start a global robotics business and let's take it on. And I'll give you 50% of the company and let's go on the journey. And that's really how Robotics Plus happened. But through that journey also, I started looking, I got involved with Enterprise Angels. I wanted to understand how we would pitch robotics to an investment arm. And in fact, I ended up leading, a significant deal with Rocket Apple, and then supported Rocket Apple as a executive director as well. And that's, now a real global business. Mount Pack's now a huge business. I've started a number of other ag companies along the way, but it was that really early introduction into that investment cycle that sort of got me thinking about how this all works and how would you go about and how would you approach that. And really between 2010 and 2020, I've been a founder in a number of businesses that have attracted over 500 million of investment and probably well over $1 billion of value. So through all those different enterprises have been lots of different learnings and lots of different ways to think about things. So that sort of really rolls on to Robotics Plus, I guess, and the way that we approached how do you taking a robotics company to the world. And I think what I learned back in those days in investment, it was today's so much I guess a little bit easier. There's so much more capital around. There's a lot more understanding of how do you take a business global. But back then, money was a lot harder to attract, and a lot of people didn't really understand agriculture, which is a really tough market to attack because it's very customer relationship. You're working with real dynamic environments, lots of different pressure points. Just because we grow an apple this way in New Zealand doesn't mean you grow the apple the same way in America. There's just all these different facets. And so we sort of set this, and probably the other point I really realised soon is New Zealand's a small market, so there was no scale here. So if we were really going to help solve New Zealand problems, we really had to look at whatever we were going to solve had to have global application to be able to crack the scale to actually solve our problems here in New Zealand. And that sort of set the premise for our journey with robotics.
So that's I guess it's a hell of a story, really, going from being a teenager as a kind of hustle, trying to figure out what to do, and all the way through to understanding the depth and breadth of the ag industry. Lots of different businesses in the mix there through your entrepreneurial journey, being an investor. You really are leading, or one of the leading kind of minds across growing New Zealand technology, in particular, exporting to the world. So over that 30 years of experience, you've maintained an entrepreneurial and forward-thinking mindset, as you said. So what do you think keeps you motivated to continually do more? A lot of people would have been quite satisfied with just one of those achievements, let alone continuing to grow and grow.
Yeah, I think for me it's purpose, and I just love New Zealand, and I just believe New Zealand, we've got a lot of talent here, and I think we've got a lot of really good generalist talent as opposed to real single focus talent, for lack of better words. But I'm just a really big believer. We've got all this talent coming out of universities in New Zealand, particularly with my focus being ag and agricultural robotics. New Zealand is a primary based country, and we've got some of the smartest growers, some of the best fruit varieties in the world growing here in New Zealand. And I think it's also New Zealand adapts innovation fast because we're essentially a long way from the rest of the world, and we can't compete on the commodity market with our produce. We have to be premium. And with premium comes a lot more adaptation, a lot more innovation. I think that gives us a really strong foothold compared to other places in the world. And my experience in America, it's about volume, not about value. So it's quite a different proposition. And so New Zealand gives that really great advantage about a great test bed. It's an opportunity for counter-seasonal testing as well, because we're the opposite time in America, so we can do things 2 times a year instead of 1 time. And we've got an incredibly supportive government in terms of opportunities around co-funding and various projects with Callaghan, support from NZT going to market, a lot of the various funds like Sustainable Farming, Future Farming Fund, those sorts of things. So we have this ability to take our dollar further than and really, if we get $1 invested, we can add another 20 cents to that, and it gives us this ability to engage our technologies early in the environments that we're trying to solve the problems for. But in saying that, you've got to have a really focus about how you're going to transfer that into that global market as well, because as I said, you go from a value-based to a volume-based is quite a different proposition. So you've really got to understand the ROIs. You've really got to understand how growers operate, the systems they operate, the supply chain, because you can solve one problem in the supply chain, but you can create another problem in the supply chain. So you've got to look at the whole thing holistically.
Absolutely. Well, I think we'll get on to talking a little about supply chain in a minute, but I guess comment from here is, with what we do at WNT as a technology incubator being supported by Callaghan, I only sing the praise of New Zealand's government over the past decade or so in supporting that, I guess, that innovation and driving New Zealand export from a technology level in particular. So completely agree. So Robotics Plus has kind of gone from a small New Zealand startup with yourself and Alistair doing a lot of the tech development to now being a leading global player. I guess what I'm really interested in understanding is, what is the core business? Why are you successful on that global level? And what have been the key milestones in that journey, in the development?
Yeah, there's lots of stories there, but I guess the original intent was how do we help the ag sector adapt to demands of a changing world? And being a grower myself, had a lot of insights about what that might mean in terms of we're challenged by labour constraints, we're challenged by supply chains, challenged by margins. So it was. It really came back. A number of things for me is how this all probably came together was really that being a grower and that real vision about helping solve problems in the ag sector with a really dynamic changing world. It was about the purpose. I really want to prove a point that we could take, we can do Silicon Valley companies from New Zealand. We don't need to be in Silicon Valley. And that was really more for me is the purpose part, is really prove a point that we can do this stuff from New Zealand and we can play on the global stage. To really sort of, it was also about believing in the journey, about where we were going to go, because we're creating stuff we don't really know how it's going to get adopted. Sometimes it's a real balancing act. But some of the things for me was we really had to ensure we understood the market. We built relationships globally. Any investment money coming in had to be investment money that added value to us and was strategic as opposed to just taking any money. So we were very, very focused on what that meant. And then it was also a lot about creating a culture within the business. So, we set out to want to really create a great culture in the business. And I was always focused on we had to scale. If we're really going to be competitive, going to the world to say, hey, we've got a team of 5 people was never going to work. We had to learn, how do we get to 100 people quickly? How do we get product into market? How do we get all those experiences? So really we set off, I'd say we really started in 2013 when Alistair finished his PhD and a very small team. We built our first autonomous fruit packing machine, and we were only just taking that into market in 2017. And through going on some of the ag tech and inclusion tours with NZT, Callahan, we started to meet a lot of people in America, and through some good friendships in America, the best advice I got was from a guy called Rob Trice, who said, Steve, if you really want to play in this market, you got to come up here and you got to be part of the community. Just come up and be part of the community. Don't come up on these tours and be, and so outside of doing the NZT Callahan type trips, we started independently going up to the market, going to conferences, starting to meet people. And it was through that, through a Callahan trip, we actually met a guy called George Kellerman, who was actually the COO for Yamaha Ventures. And Yamaha Ventures were just sort of trying to sort out what they were going to invest in. And they were really, really interested in ag, and they were working out what their ag strategy looked like. But because we were going up regularly to all these other conferences, we kept bumping into George. And eventually George says to me, look, here's our strategy. And I said, oh, you better have a look at what we're doing, because our strategy is quite aligned to your strategy. And so, we're able to show him some of the tech we're developing. And next minute, we're in a conversation about investment by Yamaha. And our investment by Yamaha sort of concluded in 2018. And we actually moved from the venture fund to directly off the balance sheet of Yamaha Japan. And back then, the valuations were crazy. So we did the Silicon Valley thing. We raised $10 million, which was sort of, I guess, our Series A. I still sort of think of it as seed money because it was our first amount of money in. But the valuation was quite insane, because we were valued at around 110 million post money, which was, we had about 16 people and we hadn't even sold a product, and we were through our vision, our planning, we're able to, create this real value. But in reflection, that valuation was fantastic. We said, hey, we've done the Silicon Valley thing, we've raised this capital, but it set a bar that was very, very high for us in terms of raising our next lot of capital. We had a lot to prove out on what we sold them in terms to be able to take that next step of evaluation over and above 110 million. So it was, a bit of wisdom would be say, ensuring, it's great to have a great valuation, but, just be sure about the bar that you're setting yourself and thinking through the next steps that you have to take for your further capital raisings. But that made us more determined, and so we were, and that $10 million, we back to my previous point, we were really able to leverage that against funding mechanisms. So a lot of non-dilutive capital that we've been able to attract through that whole journey. And I guess the big thing for us was having Yamaha was very strategic for us. It put us alongside a global brand. It gave us access to things we wouldn't normally access. So the support we've had, Yamaha's been manufacturing for years. So our ability to go and visit them and understand manufacturing processes. Yamaha are actually assembling some of our technology for us now, for example. So, access to supply chains that we may not have otherwise had. They introduce us into their relationships with NVIDIA and these other companies. So just the power of that right strategic investment has been fantastic. And then working with some of their other branches like Yamaha USA, who have, support us and fund us into projects into the US. So it's just been this really, really great journey. And it's allowed that non-dilutive capital, these relationships, has allowed us to take $10 million a long way and really scale the business. And then, getting product in market, like Robotic Apple Packers, has taken us through that journey of a prototype through to a commercial machine and all those learnings along that way. We know robotic fruit packing is not our biggest addressable market. Our robotic log scaling is not our biggest addressable market. Our big addressable market is our unmanned ground vehicle program, which is essentially driverless vehicles in orchards that can do a lot of tasks. But those two commercial products have really paved our way to a lot of understanding about how to go from a prototype to a commercial and all the challenges you get around there, bug fixing, supply chain challenges. And we've really been able to take great learnings and really start to structure ourselves really well for that next step, which is really taking our unmanned ground vehicles to the world.
Sure. So, it's really interesting you touch on the length of time from when Alistair finished his PhD to get through to 2018, your first raise. That's a 5-year journey or so, just focused on research and development. It kind of feels as though slightly slow in today's world of you must have $1 billion valuation within the first year or whatever we see in the US at the moment. So I guess what you're saying there is you're going slow to go then really fast and be prepared. And that kind of support that you've received through the New Zealand side of R&D funding, as well as that really key relationship with George and Yamaha, has been obviously super important in that journey. So I guess being from New Zealand has helped shaped the way you've taken that approach. Go slow to then go really fast and be prepared. So you touched on the importance of understanding the market. So it's not just about growing a global business in New Zealand. It's actually about doing this on an international scale. Yamaha in Japan and Yamaha in the US have been critical. So changing gear a little bit here, really keen to hear about the importance of market validation and customer insights into how you approach that kind of global success. So how critical are customer insights to creating systems suitable for industry abroad? And how have the insights you've gained shaped that strategic focus?
Yeah, it's a good question, Nick, and I think it's been a two-tier approach to that. Is obviously, the privilege of being a grower opens doors. You can go and talk to other growers anywhere in the world. It's like a club, right? You get that respect, and so just from the nature of my previous companies and involvement in the ag industry, I'd built global relationships through those other entities through Rocket Apple, through Kiwifruit industry, through pollen, and so the world's not that big a community when it comes down to it. So I already had a lot of good relationships. So always easy to pick up the phone and talk to other growers around the world and understand where their problems are going, to be able to visit and go and see what's happening on their orchards. That's opened really great doors. But then it's also been about partnerships. So we've been a company that's really, not been scared to partner. And so when you think about taking an apple packer to the world, we're just a small piece of a big integrated pack house system. And that our apple packer has to be integrated with a whole lot of other machinery and conveyor systems. So what we look for there was, how do we partner to get our product into market? And that's where we formed a relationship with Global Pack Technologies, which is actually co-owned by a New Zealand company, Jenkins Fresh Pack, and a US company, Van Doren. And they all have relationships directly into pack houses and growers as well. And they're in those sheds regularly doing design, layouts, installs, servicing. So we formed a partnership where they became our sales, distribution, and service partners. And so that took a lot of, as a high growth company, the cost of having people running around the world trying to sell things and service things when you're only selling your first few machines is an incredibly expensive process. And that's probably even worse in terms of agriculture, because it's really, really, it's hard to get, harder space to get grower adoption. It's a lot about relationships, and because every shed is designed differently, it's quite bespoke. So I guess the answer to that's been this: getting up a market regularly, meeting lots of growers, understanding the trends, sensing the market, and looking at where those, where you can seize those opportunities, and then think about partnerships. And it's not just partnerships in terms of our supply chain and our distribution or sales. We even look at partnerships about outsourcing some of the technology we're developing. So again, in a labour constrained market, it's not just ag that has a labour constrained market. It's even getting software people, engineers. It's quite constrained in lots of ways. So we've just had a really great model about how do you partner, how do we have those honest conversations about what are we good at and what aren't we good at, and yes, we can do it all, but can we do it in the timeframes we need to do it and the speed we need to do it at? So therefore, is there someone that can do a piece of that work, or someone we can partner with to help speed that process up? In terms of what we're doing, it is hard because we're creating technology for the future. So it's not as simple just to say, hey, here's the sales distribution channel. There's a lot of work about, you've got to find pathways into those adoptions. How do we get that machine into there? How do we get our unmanned ground vehicle into the wine industry? How do we get it into the apple industry? And that's about really, how do we find partnerships with big growers or big corporations that are willing to invest in the technologies? So we have a number of models where we have R&D co-investment from some of these companies for us to solve a problem, and then we've got that pathway to roll that product out. And then, from there we can broaden that out to more and more growers. So there's a lot about understanding how do we get that product into market and those pathways to get you on the global highway.
No, absolutely. And it's been a common trend over the course of the events that we've held over Tech Week, is the importance of having really trustworthy and strong partners internationally, and ensuring that there's a value alignment with them. It's all fun and good to go to the biggest, but if you don't really understand, or they don't really understand your business well, those partnerships are not necessarily going to be successful. So it's great to hear that the approach you're taking is quite a dynamic approach, and finding the best way forward is not always about doing it all yourself.
There's some lessons in there, Nick, around partnerships are sometimes not easy, and there's two. It's it's this piece about, you've got to really be open and honest. You've also you got to call it as it is when you got to call it as it is with them. But you've also internally you've got to sort of say, what did we learn? How could we do it better to partner better too? So you've got to it's a two-way street. It's just, sometimes people do partnerships and say, oh, that guy didn't deliver what we wanted, but it's a two-way street. You've got to understand how they work. They've got to understand how you work. And you've got to be able to have those really honest conversations that, in fact, we had one this morning, that, this piece is not working. How do we go forward? How do we learn from where we've got to? And then, how do we go better with it?
No, absolutely. And for my own kind of journey through this VC world and entrepreneurial before this, it's certainly something that you learn by doing it. And obviously with the experience you've got, you've done a lot. So I guess just to touch a little bit on the innovation side of Robotics Plus, not only is it the way in which you're approaching industry and building those partnerships, be it through venture funding or be it through supply chain and manufacturing and whatnot, but you also have a unique approach when it comes through cutting edge technology for contract service or for delivering your services and products in a way that the industry hadn't previously seen. So could you touch a little bit on why you have a contract service approach as opposed to a direct sales?
We actually have multiple approaches, and I think that the key with that is, understanding the market, and it comes down to sort of understanding the return on investment. It's trying to understand what are you changing and what value are you adding, and also for the customer to understand the value you're giving them. So if we look at approaches, we have projects going where the company actually funds the R&D of the prototype. Because we're saying to them, the scalability of this is not global. Why would we put our resources onto this project for 4 years to solve this problem, to sell 20 machines or 30 machines or even 40 machines? So, the question we have there is, well, you fund the R&D. That de-risks us. It was part of our strategic model, as it allowed us to grow our team to, the size of 95 it is today, is because, we're locking in R&D work for sometimes 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and it allows us to give us the confidence to bring more skill sets and to work on that project. So we have some models where the prototype's funded up front. We still own the IP. We then take the prototype into the commercial phase with them, and that's a process we've sort of done with our portside automation projects. And we've got robotic log scalers all over the ports in New Zealand now, and scan the majority of logs that are going out in New Zealand internationally. But we also had the conversation about when we sell the hardware is we'll sell the hardware at a reasonable margin, but we're solving a lot of problems for you. We're taking a lot of labour out of dangerous situations. We're doing this thing. So what is that value? And how do we get rewarded for that? So we sort of were able to bring in sort of a royalty type structure. So we've actually created recurring revenue. So we actually funded R&D, sell the hardware, and we get an ongoing recurring revenue. So that's quite a new model. And Apple Packing was a bit different, where we went to say, let's get them to pay per Apple Pack. But what we soon found is everybody uses the machine differently, and that model was never going to work. So we moved into a sort of direct sales of, in fact, we sell to our distribution sales partner. But what we're doing now is adding subscription value models to those direct sales. So we sell the hardware, but then start to introduce subscription models our machines are live, very dynamic. In any Apple Packer in the world, we can log in and see what's going on. We get all the data, so we're able to start to look at how can we get value from that and start to build subscription models. So we sort of again have a hardware sale and a subscription model is creating another recurring revenue. And then when we look at the autonomous vehicles, it's yet to be determined, because that might be as a finance lease service, and again that's where partnerships come valuable. Yamaha have a huge finance arm, so we can work with Yamaha to offer a finance lease model to the farmers to get them into that technology, or it might be a direct sale, and it might be a robotics as a service. So again, and it might be all three of those on different markets or different crops. So it's about that, understanding it and then being able to put those business models around it. And you know what I say is, you know, the tech and the innovation, you know, everyone talks about innovation, the tech, but quite often the business models are as equally as important, if not more important, than the actual technology, because it's actually, hey, I've built this cool tech, but it's actually what's the model to take it to market.
Yeah.
And you got to think a lot around, you know, what are these business models? And sometimes you don't know. It's exploratory because you're creating new tech, so you've got to work through these processes and find, like I said, pathways onto that global highway.
Yeah. So that's really fascinating. I think it speaks a lot to the approach that yourself and Alistair have had in terms of leading the business forwards. You've been dynamic in the way you're adapting to research and development. You've used resources from as many different places as possible to really understand things well. And then as you've transitioned into that commercial focus, you're also testing and trying things continuously, as opposed to just settling on one thing and hoping that it will work. I think it's a fantastic lesson, particularly for New Zealand entrepreneurs trying to take businesses to the world. You have to be continually adaptive. So I'm interested now in touching on the supply chain, because it's come up a couple of times through the comments you've made. You know, since the formation of Robotics Plus, how has the company? Well, I was going to mention that, you know, things have changed significantly since the early days of 2013, 2018 to then getting into market, and of course the last couple of years have really shaken things up a lot. So, since formation, how has the company changed to meet the demands of, you know, a changing market, and of course an increasingly challenging supply chain? And secondly to that, how do you handle these unforeseen challenges?
Yeah, that's pretty tough. I'm probably quite similar. It's about making ballsy decisions, Nick. It's you know, it is interesting. I mean, I guess there's a number of levels of that, and the first level was what one of the things for us is, you know, as we've grown from 18 people to 95, there's been a lot about the systems that we've implemented, and it's always ongoing, because the way you're structured for 18 people doesn't work for the way you're structured for 40 people, and it certainly doesn't work for when you're structured with 95 people. So it's continuously looking at your systems and understanding of the business and adaptation. And you know, we've been going through a number of changes through Robotics Plus over the last year and a half, you know, to a different way of working, because the business has matured to another level, or is maturing to another level. So you're always having to look at new systems and ways of doing things, but also having a focus on those things that really matter. The second part for us was we were, you know, pretty much in terms of supply chain in the early years is, you know, we're pretty much able to just, which was great, because when you're starting off and you're building your first products, we're able to sort of almost order the parts and deliver something in a very short time frame, like 3 months, to the COVID world now, where, you know, it's potentially 12 months. And in fact, we've got some components that you're talking 2 years. So, you know, understanding that's been a really key part. And, you know, we've had to implement, you know, new resources, like, you know, beefing up your procurement team, putting in good procurement strategies, you know, ensuring, and then it's about what's happening in the market. You've got your customers saying, your sales agents saying, this is what the sales forecast looks like, but it's lumpy and uncertain. And then you're sort of having to make calls about, well, what do we believe? What does our sensing say? How big a gamble are we willing to really supply those parts down well ahead of time? And I think we've been lucky. It's not been easy, but we've been lucky where, you know, really great with my team is I'm just going, when do we have to order parts for the next 10 to be able to keep our supply chain, our production running, you know, smoothly all the way through the year. So we've just got these systems that say it's decision day, and then that's coming down to what's your intel saying? Do you make that decision, yes or no? Do we commit to another, you know, $3 or $4 million of components or not? So it's quite challenging. And it's also challenged cash flows and those things, because you're suddenly now buying some components so far ahead of time that, you know, you've got to have a lot of conversations with your customer around better alignment around deposits on orders, to how that's aligning with your supply chain, you know, what you're buying in terms of components. So a lot of different aspects there you got to take. And then further that, we've got new technology that we might have in our sales target that we're going to sell X number of machines next year of this new technology. We haven't even built the new technology, but then we're actually already ordering parts for it. Because if we're going to deliver on those sales metrics, we've got to take those gambles and those punts. So, again, I mean, we've prototyped, we've got a certain idea what we have to order, but we've got this real focus on ordering. Last year we ordered a number of motors for something we're going to sell in 2023 we haven't fully completed.
It goes right back to what you kind of said, right at the beginning of the conversation here. That forward planning and that forward thinking has always been something that's front of mind for you. And I guess in dealing with challenging times like like the past couple of years, obviously that approach has really been valuable to ensuring you're staying ahead and staying on top of your delivery and that promise to your customers.
And it's getting your teams thinking about this. That when from the R&D guys thinking about, well, this is what we're set on as a component, but having procurement team being able to look and say what's the availability of that, and getting information up quickly so you can make really quick informed time decisions to ensure you can hit the timing.
Yeah, no, fantastic. So for those in the audience, we've got only a few minutes left. Please put any questions you have in the Q&A box, and we'll be sure to get those answered. So, Steve, a couple more from me. Two more things really to touch on. As we look to the future, be it supply chain issues or recruitment or the climate change element of the way the world's headed to food production and the impact it has on that. You've mentioned that you're facing many different issues with building the business, expanding the business, but in particular with robotics, how do you think that robotics as a tool can help alleviate some of these hurdles and ensure the sustainable future of fresh food production?
Yeah, look, I think as technologies are developing, as things, the tech's changing all the time, and I think with stuff that's available in the world today, it's definitely encouraging that there's a lot of ways we can approach resolving sort of those, I know it's the dull, dirty, dangerous jobs, or those repetitive jobs that people don't want to do. And so, we approach that in a lot of ways, like with the fruit packing, it's about, people standing and orientating an apple and putting the best color side up in a tray. So, with vision system neural networks now, we can train the algorithms to do that and, just alleviate that dull job, put it on the end of the grader, and you don't have people standing, and you redeploy those people into better jobs. Or, if we think about our portside automation technologies, we've got people away from dangerous situations, climb over trucks, being around logs. Again, it's been that adaptation of smart systems. Again, it's vision systems. It's a number of sensors and being able to develop those algorithms that allow things to happen. And so you've got these complex engineering challenges about how do you engineer something to do a task, and then you've got this sort of the AI component, the smart piece on top. So what we're focused on now, be able to help really focus there, is ensuring we've got that broadness of skill sets through the organization, that we have people that are experts across all those different fields, that we can bring these technologies together. We've also sort of looked at how our technologies apply across the different things we're solving for, and how we can utilize the technologies in different ways. So we've got mobile log scalers now, which was built off our mobile vehicle sort of platforms for the orchards, for example, and we use vision systems that we use on the apple packers. We use vision systems on the scaling operations. So being able to keep being able to create that modularity that brings that brings sort of a easier supply chain and better utilization. And then it's with autonomous vehicles, we can reduce efficiency. Autonomous spraying, we can increase efficiency of spraying by 30%. So that means less machinery, no people, a number of things. With smart variable rate spraying technologies, we can reduce 30 to 40% of the chemical use. You start to look at harvesting crops, and that's not necessarily that we have to do something cheaper. It's actually saying, well, if we could just pick 50% of the fruit, we could alleviate 50% of the labour requirement. So it's really getting in an understanding and then being able to apply, because you may not be able to pick every fruit because it's just too complex because of tree structures and occlusions. But hey, we could at least take 50% of the fruit off quite quickly with a very simple sort of, robotics approach. And it's about making this technology simple as well.
Yeah. So what you're ultimately touching on here is it's safety, it's efficiency, and then it's a redeployment and training of technical skills so that people can do what they're best at, be aware, and use their minds to do things that are far more valuable than just stand on a picking line. So we've got a couple of questions, and then the last thing I want to touch on before we finish would be a lesson from you. So a couple of questions first, and then our last comment. Andrew asks, how far off is the kiwifruit picking technology for mass picking, and what have been the biggest challenges in bringing this to market?
Yeah, so the kiwifruit picker is probably the most exposed video footage that the world's seen, is this kiwifruit harvester. The truth of that is it sits on a shelf because it's an industry that doesn't or hasn't had the foresight to invest in that technology. And again, it's about scalability. So the fact that industry has not been interested in it, and we talk about New Zealand kiwifruit industry being big. It's not that big. I have dinner with people in the US that grow 75,000 acres of wine grapes. Which is a family business. It's substantially more scalable. Zespri grows 14,000 hectares, which is about 30,000 acres, and you got an industry that has, I guess, had RSE workers and hasn't felt the pain enough to be investing in these technologies, or in fact having the foresight to invest them ahead of the curve. And it's because that industry is structured really complicated, because you sort of have a Zespri marketing arm and then you have individual post-harvest operators. So again, for us, it's not that we haven't want to do it. It's just the industry level, the industry hasn't engaged in it to the level for us to actually tie up a lot of talent to solve that problem finally. So, so again, that's a decision we made, that we did a lot of work on that. It formed Alistair's PhD plus a significant government-funded piece from Auckland Waikato universities, but it sits on a shelf. Whereas, so that's the blunt answer to that one.
Yeah, well, I guess it's like anything. When you're trying to scale, you're always going to come across some sort of challenges and hurdles. But ultimately, that's the development of the technology and also the capacity of the team behind it. To think as Robotics Plus has done, really in an open-minded way. The last question here from Khalid: what are the most common challenges to fruit picking, or to automate fruit picking?
Yeah, look, I think the biggest challenge there, and we have done work with kiwifruit and we have done work with apples. Probably the biggest challenge there is this expectation that you're going to pick everything is one challenge, whereas tree structures don't necessarily allow that to happen. And people sort of expect automation tech's going to come in and solve all problems, but it's a two-way street. As an automation company saying, well, if you actually grew your structures this way and you made all your fruit available for us to see, then we could pick it all. So it's having those conversations, and you're seeing that transformation now, where you're seeing, if you look in New Zealand, people like Turners and Growers, Rocket, they're growing these new 2D systems where, in fact, it's linear, all the fruit are exposed. So they're starting to grow for automation. The second thing is a lot of challenges around occlusion, leaves and branches and things like that. So these growing structures start to reduce those occlusions, because if you can't see it, you can't pick it. It's like a robot has a more linear vision across the plane than we do. That we can sort of move our heads around quickly and look under branches and things, but. So it's a lot about that, about transformation of growing systems to meet automation. It's not always that automation should be the one that should be able to go and solve complex problems. It's got to be met both ways, in my view. And then it comes back to what I said earlier, is that the expectation of picking all the fruit, whereas opposed to saying, actually, you're labour constrained, but if we could pick 50% of the fruit, that really takes that constraint down, that you've still got people. And I think you always need people, because there's always situations where you need people. So it's getting people to understand those dynamic systems and sort of making those decisions about, well, actually, just do a robot that does the first pick of easy to pick fruit, and then we can have the teams come through afterwards. But you have reduced a significant amount of labour requirement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's really interesting to hear that the orchards are now adapting the way they grow to suit the automation. It kind of shows that full cycle loop. The value that you're providing is so great that they're actually adapting to ensure that the value can be even greater from their end. It shows the advancements, I guess, that we're making in rapid progress.
I think that's growers starting to understand that. We're creating technologies that are going into really dynamic environments. You've got rain, you've got mud, you've got bright sun, you've got all these different things being thrown at you, and you got terrain, and it's not like a robot in a factory. And so the scalability of these technologies aren't huge. So there's no white knights going to be riding in to solve these problems for them. So if they don't start adapting and don't start trialing this stuff, then there's going to be progression will be really, really slow. You've seen Broadacre is heavily invested in, because with John Deere and those guys, because it's just huge acreages of scale of flat ground that they're just mowing down maize or soybean or whatever it is, versus going into really complex orchards with tree structures and rows and drains and all these different things. So it's about relationship and people starting to understand how tech will play, and they need to help the technology companies. Otherwise, technology companies are not going to happen. And you're seeing a lot of ag tech companies just burn out very, very fast, because getting adoption, getting the scale is not happening, and they just disappear. Or you see someone who's made some significant ground just gets acquired by John Deere for the talent, and that tech never really goes anywhere.
Yeah. So I guess last thing from me, and I really appreciate the insight, and I think we could probably keep talking for another hour or so if we wanted. But last thing I'm really keen to hear from, and this is more of a personal thing for you, but from the last 30 plus years or so of experience, all the way through to the automation and forward thinking with Robotics Plus today, what has been a key lesson for you, and I guess perhaps what's something in your career that at the time seemed kind of inconsequential, but now upon reflection has probably been really impactful?
Yeah, there's a few of them. I think probably for me was I go sort of back to a couple of events. I go back to sort of when I grew up was my grandfather and my uncle. My grandfather was an avid grower, and he used to always teach me as a grandkid a lot about growing things. My uncle was an entrepreneur who had a chain of electrical stores, and he always let me go and play with electronics. And I sort of always had this love for sort of these techie things and growing. And then as I went through that growing cycle, I think one of the big events was that PSA event in 2010 in the kiwifruit industry. It really taught me a lot, in terms of resilience. It taught me a lot about, you have to be resilient. And it taught me a lot about pivoting. It taught me a lot about courage, because, that was when you suddenly just take $6 or $8 million of cash flow out overnight, it's pretty scary. And it taught a lot about sitting there for some time, thinking about the strategy. How do I get out of this? What do I do with this? And I think that was quite a change. And another event was in 2007. I crossed the Gobi Desert on a bit of technology developed in New Zealand on a blowcart, and it was that moment where it was about people. It was about stepping out of the business and actually being able to look into the business. And the importance of being on the outside of the business a lot. And that you could relate that into that being in the market, that sensing. It's that taking a view from the outside in and the inside out. And I think and that sort of lesson about that future thinking, you know, always thinking 5 years ahead, because if you believe in where your journey is going to be 5 years, it makes those years leading up to 5 years easier to deal with, because they're tough. You know, being an entrepreneur is not easy. You're making really big calls every day. It can be quite lonely at times. There's a whole bunch of people don't get you. It's you know, so you got to build, you know, you got to build things around you. You know, I have these little sayings that support me along the way. Is, you know, today's already happened. You can't change it. What I learned for it, but, you know, don't look back, look forward. You know, it's happened. You know, a lot of people dwell on what happened as opposed to, oh, well, that was a good lesson. That we learned something there. Just keep moving forward. You know, I just have the view, if you don't like me, I don't care. I am who I am, you know, and it's just, you build these little, you know, resilience things, but it is really important. And then it's really about, you know, the belief in your people. You know, it's about, we've got amazing talent, what these people do, and it's about believing in them to give you that confidence that you're going to get there too. You know, the guys that develop our tech, you know, there's incredible talent and thinking goes into these complex technologies. And I think that's so important in terms of believing in people. And that was a big drive for us with RPL, was wanted to always create a great culture, you know, and because we're our own business, we don't have to follow textbook. We can be who we want to be, not what people think we should be. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, I guess that that speaks a lot to the New Zealand mindset as well. We sit at the bottom of the world and we look outwards to everybody. It gives us that kind of, we are who we are, and we're going to work with whoever we can, as opposed to, you know, sitting halfway up the world and having your backs to some people all the time. So, you know, don't look out or don't look back, look forwards, and look out to where the opportunity and where the rest of the world is something I think that all entrepreneurs in New Zealand can really drive forward with. So I think that's about all we've got time for today. Actually, we've run a little bit over. Thank you to Steve's wonderful insights. I think key takeaways for me is, moving fast or moving slow to then move really quickly, being very strategic in the way that you think about partnership and development, finding key insights from your markets to help to drive and develop the way you grow things, and of course, as you just mentioned at the end there, Steve, believing in the people that you've got. People are obviously absolutely key to the technology journey. So thank you very much, Steve. It's been a truly wonderful conversation. Thank you to all the audience as well, and for the questions. If you do have an innovation, or you are building a company and you'd like to speak to some investors about how to best go about that journey, please do reach out to any of the WNT team. My email address is there should anybody like to contact me directly. Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Great, thanks, and thanks everyone for listening in.